He grew up in Kansas. His whole family was in Kansas, and they were farmers. And every day he would sit outside and he'd watch the trains. And his mother would sometimes get a Vogue magazine, and he would look inside Vogue magazine, and he would see all the sort of society pages of these beautiful, glamorous, parties and people and gorgeous women. And he said to me, I would always wonder, like, when do I get on that train to get to New York, to go to those parties and meet those people? And I think he was someone who was always one step ahead. So I think he was someone who, at all costs, broke rules to get to self-expression. He loved to experiment and get there first, and he had that great insight into understanding how to get your finger on the pulse. It was a time of absolute change. The world was on fire, as my father said, with change, and they were a big part of it. And my mother grew up in California with her parents being very important people in the movie industry, and my father was an actor at a young age, as a teenager. So he had grown up, being on television, being in films, and between the two of them, they kind of knew everyone from old school Hollywood to young, hip, happening Hollywood. And my father had, as my mother has always said, an eye for the beautiful and unusual. 1712 North Crescent Heights. It's a book that I edited and made with Grable Press, with Lisa Eisner and Ramon Alonso. And this is me with my father in Malibu, outside of Jane Fonda's house, where we went every weekend. She was my godmother, and my father was shooting pictures because he always had the camera in his hand. My father was someone who was always capturing the world around him as it was happening. So if he was at the beach and he was at my godmother Jane Fonda's house and she had friends over, he would just shoot take pictures of everyone. He was constantly framing, when he didn't have his camera, he was constantly putting his hands up to frame things as photographs, and so he was constantly taking pictures. So he was always, whatever worlds he was involved with, he was constantly capturing on film. He got very into collecting art. He was very very good friends with many of the artists in Los Angeles, from Ed Ruscha and Billy Al Bankston and Kenny Price, and a lot of the New York artists, Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg. He worked very well with that and was very supportive of their whole world as an art collector and also as an artist himself. I love those impromptu pictures of the artists because those were his friends, those were his allies, those were his buddies, and they made art together and they celebrated art together. He was asked by Irving Blum at the Ferris Gallery to take pictures of the artists that were having shows at his gallery, and he was friends with all of them. And as he would say to me, actors are very shy off camera to have their photograph. When they're not making a movie, they're very shy to sit and have their photograph taken. But artists absolutely loved it, and they would dress up and they would have this incredible panache, and they were very into it. So he was like, they were great subjects. And sometimes he would take pictures of Irving, and they would do the announcements for the show around those photographs. He said to me that when he took a break from acting, the one place that he felt he could really dive into was taking photographs. It was something that I think took a place for him. Instead of directing films, he took, still photographs. And I think that whole experience led him to be the director he became with Easy Rider in the last movie. My mother, Brooke Hayward, was a model, and she was very close to Diana Vreeland through her, experiences in fashion and working as a model. And when my father took a break from acting in the early 60s, Diana Vreeland called my mother and said, "Brooke, you're cool, you're young, you're beautiful, and your husband's an actor. I hear he's a photographer. Can't he take pictures of young, cool people? Like people he knows, like actors that he hangs out with in the actor studio, maybe some young bands. I mean, there's a whole hip happening thing happening in Los Angeles, and can he get on it and take some photographs for Vogue?" And so he did that. He covered all those those worlds very well, which is what's so, I think, so interesting too, is it wasn't just one point of view. He had many points of view and many different sources of focus and contact. My father had a great eye. He never cropped his photographs. He never altered them or cropped them. His natural composition was extraordinary. He would go walk down the street and capture things and look at things and graffiti and street signs and the world around him in a way that it was very much like Marcel Duchamp, you know, saying when the artist has the ability to point at an ordinary object and say, this is art. It's hard to describe what it's like to be around someone who had X-ray vision for seeing things that would then be developed in the darkroom and come to life in a way that you wouldn't have imagined before. He really wanted to direct in the 1960s. He really wanted to be a director, and he felt frustrated that he couldn't get a job at a certain point as an actor, and then he wasn't able to direct a film, and so he really focused on photography as his way of expressing himself, and he loved it. And he said that from stills and taking still photographs, he went to directing a movie, and it was very seamless for him.